I am back with the second part of the Lauder family murders case. If you haven't seen the first part, if you are new here and you haven't seen the first part of this case, hi, welcome. But I would suggest that you go check out the first part so you can actually see or make sense of the entire story. But anyway, if you are new here, welcome. My name is Prince Tlali. This is True Crime and Chill, where I tell you guys about some of the most shocking true crime cases in South Africa, and I upload a new video every week. So if you would like to keep on hearing from me, I would highly suggest that you subscribe to the channel and give me a thumbs up on the video if you like it. And if you want to give your thoughts, go ahead and comment down below. Tell me what you think. I would really appreciate your support. So without any further ado, let me go ahead and just tell you about the second part of this case. But wait, before I go forward, I know that I said I was going to upload the second part of the video between Monday and Tuesday, and now it's Friday. What happened was I accidentally deleted the second part after editing it. So I had to redo everything. I was so exhausted, I was so drained that I just could not shoot another minute. So I decided to wait like 2 or 3 days before I shoot again. So yeah, that's what happened with the other part that I shot in the first place. Like the second part that I shot around Tuesday. So yeah, I'm sorry for making you wait, but I'm here now. So let's just go ahead and dive into the second part of this case. So in the first part, I was telling you guys all the things that happened, how Matthew, Nicolette, and Horace came together, how they all formed this little group of theirs that believed that they had a mission that they had to serve from God, a holy mission that was given to them by God. And this entire thing was Matthew's idea, and he was the mastermind behind everything that happened here. He manipulated Horace and Nicolette into thinking that he is the third son of God. And with that being said, he told them that they had to kill their parents. He told them that their parents had to be killed because this is what God wanted. And he was such a terrible human being that he was abusing Nicolette, and he was abusing even Horace as well, because he kept on telling them that this is the way of God and this is their punishment. This is their holy punishment, their holy training, their holy whatever. So he kept on being so manipulative, more controlling than ever, and even more abusive. And those are the kind of things that we spoke about in the first part. But now, since Matthew gave out the idea that Horace and Nicolette had to kill their parents, or their parents had to die because their parents, Ricky and Johnny, were evil beings sent from the devil, now that he came up with that idea, they made a few attempts to try to take the lives of both Ricky and Johnny Lauder. And that's exactly what I'm going to start off with today. I'm going to tell you exactly what they wanted to do in order to take their lives. So if you remember from the first part, I mentioned that their plan was to kill Johnny first and then wait about a month or so before they kill Ricky. And so when they started with their first attempt, they wanted to add pure alcohol to Johnny's whiskey. And I don't know if that was going to work. I don't know where they got the pure alcohol from, but they were going to add it to his whiskey and hope that he could somehow die from alcohol poisoning. Now, I'm no scientist. I don't know if that would work. I don't know, but that's what they wanted to do. And luckily, that attempt failed. So when that plan failed of adding pure alcohol to Johnny's whiskey, now they wanted to look for another way to poison him. And then they got this idea that they were going to go to the botanical gardens and try to find a poisonous plant so they can take its sap and add it to his whiskey. I don't know if they did the research about that plant or whatever plant it was never mentioned. But they wanted to get a poisonous plant and take its sap and add it into his whiskey so that when he drinks it, it could somehow kill him. But they were not so smart about this idea. As a matter of fact, they were very stupid about this idea, because they just added the sap in the whiskey. They didn't try to, I don't know, dissolve it within the whiskey. They didn't try to properly mix it within the whiskey, because as soon as Johnny saw some form of white substance at the bottom of his whiskey bottle, he did not even drink it. Okay, he threw the entire bottle away without even taking a sip. So that plan as well also tanked. So they were not very smart about it. And now that they've tried like 2 times to kill Johnny, Matthew was getting impatient and he was getting desperate. Okay, he wanted to get this over and done with quickly because if you remember from the first part, I told you that for him, this was all for money. Okay, he just wanted to cash in on the family's life insurance, to cash in on their assets, to cash in on whatever money they had because he just wanted to live the soft life. So he was getting impatient, he was getting desperate. He wanted to get rid of this guy and his wife as soon as possible. Now that both his attempts didn't work, he now decided that they were now going to kill both Ricky and Johnny in one go. They were no longer going to wait a month or so before they kill Ricky after killing her husband. They now were going to kill them both in one go because Matthew just couldn't take it anymore. So then they decided to come up with this other plan that they were going to take a syringe, an empty syringe, and they were gonna inject both Ricky and Johnny with a syringe just full of air. So basically, there's nothing in it; it's just air, and they were gonna pump the air directly into their veins so that they can get an embolism. They can get a heart attack and die from an embolism. And when I got to find out what an embolism was, I got to find out that it's an obstruction of an artery, which is caused by either a blood clot or an air bubble. So I'm guessing they thought that once they inject both Ricky and Johnny with that syringe full of air, they would somehow get an embolism from that air bubble and die. So that's what they were going to try to do next. So on July 19th of 2008, this is when everything happened. And just before they were about to get everything in motion, they first had to get a couple of equipments. So they decided to sell Hardis's camera just so they can buy a taser, some latex gloves, and those syringes that they're going to need to pump them with all that air that was supposed to give them heart attacks from embolisms. So what they were going to do with the taser was that Hardis was supposed to taser his mother and knock her unconscious. And once she was unconscious, they were going to try to inject her with that syringe. And at this time, Johnny was sleeping. He was knocked out from the heavy drinking that he was doing because at this time he was really, really drinking heavily. He would drink so much that he would end up being knocked out entirely. So when they realized that Ricky is the one who's still up, they decided that they were going to start with her, and the plan was to taser her, knock her unconscious, and then inject her with that syringe. But what they also remembered was that they had to create alibis for themselves so that they don't get incriminated when the police start investigating everything. So the first alibi that they wanted to create was that Matthew was going to head to the mall to buy some movie tickets so that they may explain it as if like they were not at the house the time Johnny and Ricky got killed. So Matthew went to the mall, he bought some movie tickets, and the plan was while he's away, both Nicolette and Hardis were going to be the ones who start off by killing their mother Ricky, which is so strange because if you remember in the first part, I mentioned that Matthew volunteered to be the one who kills Ricky and Johnny, but now somehow their plan had changed and it had to be Nicolette and Hardis who had to kill their mother first before they go on to kill their father, as Matthew was busy buying some movie tickets at the mall to make it seem as if like they were not at the house at that time. So it was really kind of weird that they had somehow switched the plan like that. So as Matthew was away getting the tickets, Nicolette lured her mother into the kitchen, pretending as if like she wanted to talk to her about something. Her mother had no idea that Hardis was hiding in the kitchen behind the door with the taser and the syringe, waiting to shock her unconscious and then inject her with that syringe. So as both Nicolette and Ricky got into the kitchen, and Ricky was facing away from Hardis without having any idea that he was behind her, Hardis then came up from behind her and then he tried to taser her. But fortunately enough, the taser that they bought wasn't really in good condition, so it didn't really work. But instead of trying to explain this away as some kind of prank or some, I don't know, anything that they could think of to get rid of any suspicion, Hardis then decided to lock his mother in a chokehold instead. So you can tell that they were very serious about this. They really wanted to do this. So when the taser didn't work, he decided that he was going to knock her out by choking her instead. And at first, Ricky, bless her soul, at first she didn't really realize what her son's true intentions were. So she thought that Horace was just playing around and he was just messing around with her and it was just some kind of prank. But the more her son kept tightening her arm around her neck, the more it got hard for her to breathe, the more she realized that this could actually mean they're trying to hurt me. So she tried to fight him off. She tried to get him off of her, but Hardest was just too strong. So their plan wasn't going exactly as they thought it was. And now that they had opted for the option of trying to choke her unconscious, Nicolette then decided to help his brother by jumping on top of her mother and hitting her on the face over and over, punching her with her own hands until Ricky eventually passed out. So they seriously decided that, listen, it's now or never, okay? If we don't do this now, we'll never get another chance. So she jumped on top of her and she just went crazy on her, and Ricky ended up being knocked out. So now that Ricky was knocked out, Nicolette decided to call Matthew to tell him that, listen, it didn't really go as much as we thought it was. We couldn't really taser her. And of course, Matthew got angry at the both of them. So now Matthew had to go back to the house to see what they had done. And when he got there, he got furious and started saying that they messed up the plan and now they had to fix it. So now that everything was getting all messed up, they had to come up with a new way to kill Ricky. But still, they still had those syringes in their hands. So they ended up trying to inject her with those syringes full of air, but they also didn't work. Okay, she didn't get an embolism, she didn't get a heart attack. They just didn't work. So now they had to come up with another way to kill her. And Matthew was getting livid. He was getting frustrated that Nicolette and Horace just couldn't kill their own mother. So as Matthew was busy scolding Nicolette, saying that this is all her fault, she had to fix it, they were standing next to a set of knives. And when Matthew saw this set of knives, he took a knife and he gave it to Nicolette. And he told her that she had to stab her mother, so much so that he even showed her exactly where to stab her to make sure that she actually kills her this time. So they went from just injecting her with the syringe to stabbing her with a knife. So you can tell how intense this situation was now getting. And this next part is so heartbreaking. It's really, really sad. Before Ricky got killed, she looked at her kids and she was wondering why they were doing this. She was asking them why they were doing this. She loved them, she raised them, she gave them everything that they could possibly need. So she was asking herself why. And this never got through to Nicolette and Horace. They just could not see that that was their own mother lying there. And so, because they were so blinded by Matthew's lies, Nicolette took the knife and ended up stabbing her mother over 11 times to her death. And this is how they killed Ricky. And it is so tragic. It's very, very ruthless for anyone to be killed like this. So after the stabbing happened, Matthew told them to collect everything that they had bought, everything that they were going to use, and put it in a plastic bag. And then Nicolette saw that she was filled, like her clothes were stained with her mother's blood. She had her mother's blood all over her. So she decided to go change her clothes. And after all of that happened, Matthew then turned to Horace as well, and he started scolding him as well, saying that he also screwed everything up. And because of this, he also had to fix it. And so Horace was now the one who was supposed to kill Johnny. Because Matthew said that he had to make it right with God. He angered God by messing this plan up. So he had to fix it by being the one who kills his father Johnny. And Horace tried to refuse, but Matthew got in his head even more by telling him things like if he didn't do this, he wouldn't get into heaven and he would be damned for all eternity. And he just had to do it. this was the way of God. So, of course, Hardis, believing Matthew to be who he said he was, he decided that, okay, I'll be the one to kill my own father. But this wasn't the end of it. So Matthew went on again to say to Hardis that, listen, even after you kill your father, you're still going to have to do something else. You're going to have to kill yourself as well. You're going to have to write a suicide note saying that you went crazy and decided to kill your mother and your father. And then afterwards, you saw what you had done, and then you decided to kill yourself as well. So now this was the new plan that they came up with. Now Hardis had to be the one who kills his own father. And then after that, he had to kill himself after writing a suicide note saying that he just went crazy and decided to kill his parents. So now this was the new plan that they had to go with. And I don't know how or why Hardis just couldn't see what Matthew was doing, but they were all so much under his control that they just could not do anything about it. Now, I know this is a lot of plans that they came up with to kill Johnny and Ricky. And of course, with every plan, they had to come up with an alibi. So now that Hardis had to be the one who kills Johnny and end up killing himself, they had to create another alibi. But this time, Matthew had to take Nicolette with him so they can be out of the house while Hardis is busy killing his father. So now the new alibi they were going to create was that Matthew and Nicolette were going to be at the mall. They were going to be walking around so cameras can see them and people can see them. And while this was happening, Johnny was going to be killed by Hardis, and then Hardis was going to kill himself afterwards. And just so Matthew could be sure that nothing will ever be traced back to them, he took everything that they used on that night and he took it with them and Nicolette as they left and went for the mall. And he did this so he can get rid of it if Hardis somehow manages to not kill himself. If he decides to have second thoughts about it, he was just going to get rid of all that evidence. But if he wasn't going to have any second thoughts about it, if he was actually going to go through with killing himself after killing Johnny, they were going to plant all of that evidence and make it seem as if like Hardis just went crazy and killed his entire family while his sister and her fiance were out that night. So that was how things were going to go on. So now it was all up to Hardis. It was all up to him to make sure that everything ends that night. Matthew and Nicolette were out. It was just him, his mother, who was dead on the floor after being stabbed over 11 times by her own daughter, and his father, who was in his bedroom sleeping. So Hardis then went to the bedroom where his father was sleeping, and he took a cord with him that he was going to use to strangle Johnny with it. And even though Johnny was sleeping, he wasn't that knocked out that he wouldn't feel it when Hardis tried to strangle him. Because as Hardis tried to wrap the cord around his neck so he can tighten it, Johnny woke up and he sat upright to try to see what was happening. But as he did this, Hardis wrestled him to the ground, trying to strangle him with the cord, trying to tighten it up around his neck. But Johnny was fast enough to react in a way that he placed his hands between the cord and his neck, stopping it from being any more tighter. And as they were fighting like this, back and forth, Johnny was asking his son Hardis, like, why are you doing this? But Hardis just couldn't stop himself. He just couldn't. He had to go on. He had to kill Johnny. And so they wrestled, they struggled for a little bit until Johnny decided to get himself free from Hardis. And as he did this, he walked into the hallway trying to catch his breath. But then Hardis caught up with him, and as he did this, he jumped on his back and he placed the cord around his neck again. But this time, Johnny wasn't fast enough to stop it from being tightened up around his neck. And with that being said, Hardis tightened up the cord so much that his father passed out. And when he saw that his father passed out, he just had to be sure that he was dead. And then he decided to tighten up the cord for another 15 minutes around his father's neck. So he was strangling his father for 15 minutes until there just wasn't any more life left in Johnny's body. And so that is how Hardest killed his own father. And now that the first part of that plan was done, the last plan was for Hardest to kill himself after writing a suicide note. But he just couldn't go on with it. He couldn't go on with killing himself. And so he called his sister. And when his sister saw his call coming in, her and Matthew were very surprised, but they knew that this meant that he couldn't kill himself. So they decided to return back to the house, and they found Johnny on the floor in the hallway, dead. And Hardest was there. He was shaken up. He was so terrified, he just couldn't even speak. But it was too late at this point because both their parents were dead. I just wonder what they were thinking. How could anyone do this to someone they call their mom and their dad? How could you just turn one day and kill your own parent? And all because of what someone else came and told you, all because of what someone else claimed about themselves. How could you just turn against your own family? How does that even happen? But now that Hardest couldn't kill himself, they had to come up with another cover story for what actually happened in that house. And so they decided that, okay, remember we once sent threatening text messages and threatening letters to Johnny and Ricky? Well, we're going to say to the police that they were attacked by those people who were behind those messages and those letters. And those people came in, they killed Johnny and Ricky, and they tied Hardest up in his room, and they beat him up as well. And they were confident in this idea because Hardest had a lot of bruises, had a lot of injuries from his fight with his father. So they thought that it would work when they tell the police that he was beaten up by these people who came and attacked Johnny and Ricky. So that was their new plan that they were going to go with. Then Matthew came up with another idea that he somehow had to be out of there, that he had to be nowhere near the house. When they call the police, when they, decide to report everything and act as if like it was such a tragic incident. So Matthew told Nicolette to go drop him off at the nearest taxi station so he can take a taxi back home to Phoenix. And when he got to Phoenix, he was going to go to the police station and tell them that his girlfriend called him, his fiance, as a matter of fact, called him and told him that her parents were just murdered and her brother was also beaten up and tied up. And that's exactly what they did. Matthew, when he was in Phoenix, he went to the police station and reported the incident. And so two officers went back to the Lauder family house and they went to go see what actually happened there. And so when the two officers got there and saw the terrible, terrible scene that was at that house, they decided to call Detective Duma. And if you still remember from the first part of the video, Detective Duma is the one who was dealing with the family on a number of occasions. So he knew the family, and so they called him to come and check it out. And when he got to the scene and saw what was happening there, he just could not believe what his eyes were showing him. But what surprised him even more was seeing Matthew at that house, because like I just mentioned, there was a time when Ricky kicked Matthew out of her house with Detective Duma present and saying that she never wanted to see Matthew back in that house again. So the detective was really surprised to see Matthew there, but he had more important things to worry about. And so he decided to call the Durban crime unit to come and investigate the scene. But the investigators, along with Detective Duma, just had a feeling that there was more to what happened there than meets the eye. Like something else could be the reason for this. Like, what really happened there? Because they really were not buying the story of some targeted attack on Johnny and Ricky Lauder. So they just were feeling a bit off with that whole story. But then the police took Matthew, Nicolette, and Horace outside, explaining the whole process to them, what had to happen, what had to be done. And they had to do some tests on Horace's body to check his injuries, to check his bruises. And they had to do some blood tests as well to check if maybe they were intoxicated or anything like that. And Matthew was very surprised at this. He was very shocked to see what was happening around that house because he just thought that the police were going to come, look at the bodies, investigate whatever they could, and leave. He thought that they were going to leave him with the house and everything in it. But now that the house was a crime scene, they were not allowed back in that house. And Matthew was shocked that things were happening like this. Then suddenly it hit his sick and twisted mind that if the police keep on investigating the house, they might find something that's going to incriminate him. They might find something that may tell them exactly what happened in that house. And he was worried about this. And so, because of this, he decided to go to one of the police officers and say, listen, it's really cold outside. So, could I just please go get something warm for me and my fiance? Because it's seriously cold and we don't have anything warm on ourselves. And so they let him go and get some jerseys or jackets for him and Nicolette. But the real purpose behind this was so he can go through Nicolette's room and try to see if there's anything that the police would find that they could use to incriminate him and everyone else on that murder. And so he found his diary, and in his diary, there were a lot of things in there that could have incriminated him. So he took the diary and he took the jackets and jerseys as if he wanted to get them, and he smuggled the diary out of the house. He managed to sneak out of the house with it, and the police never saw this. But then, as the pathologists kept on studying the scene, as they kept on examining the scene, they got to realize that Ricky had died 2 hours before her husband was killed. So now they got to wonder, like, why in the world would some random people come in, attack Ricky, kill her, and then wait for 2 hours before they kill her husband? If this was a targeted attack, I'm sure you and I would think the same thing, that these people would want to attack both Ricky and Johnny, kill them as soon as possible, as fast as possible, and then leave, get the hell out of there before they're seen, before their children come back if they really were out. So for them to wait 2 whole hours to kill Johnny, it made no sense at all. And so the police decided that, okay, this story of this being a targeted attack is a bit off. And so they took Matthew, Nicolette, and Horace, and they took them to the police station for more questioning. And I just love that because now they could see that the jig is up. They were about to be caught. So as the police kept on following procedures, they kept on questioning, investigating everything. Matthew was getting restless. He was getting restless. He was getting anxious, and he kept on asking if they were under arrest. He kept on asking what was taking them so long, why they had to be at the police station for so long. And the police they handled the situation so well. They just said to him, no, listen, we just need you to cooperate. We're doing everything we can to solve this case as fast as we can. All we need is your cooperation. So just be patient. We'll attend to you and we'll release you if there's nothing else that we need from you. So Matthew was getting very scared at this point. He was getting worried that they could find something they could use against him. But it turns out that this was all just a strategy that was done by the police. They were keeping them there at the police station for as long as possible while they investigate the scene and try to find something they could use to catch them without any possibility of them getting out of it. And so this shows you that the police were now saying, okay, that story of people coming in and attacking the parents, that story is a lie. And something else happened here, and we have to find out what really happened. So they were just keeping them there to make sure that they could find something to incriminate them with. And so that was a really smart idea if you think about it, because now it means that the walls were caving in on all three of them. They were about to pay for what they had done. And then finally, they managed to find enough evidence to place all three of them, Matthew, Nicolette, and Horace, under arrest in suspicion of the murders of Ricky and Johnny Lauder. And after they got arrested, Nicolette then decided to call her grandmother, the mother of Johnny, and she told her grandmother everything that happened. And what happened next is one of the most heartbreaking things that I've ever heard about. So, as Nicolette's mother got to learn that her son was murdered and her daughter in law was also murdered, and not just by anyone, but by her own grandkids, she just could not take it. She had a heart attack and she ended up dying from the heart attack. So now it was a third life that all three of them had taken with their evil acts, and this was just so heartbreaking. But unfortunately, Nicolette's grandmother passed away from her heart attack. So now that they were all under arrest, they were taken apart to different rooms so they can be questioned even more, so they can write their statements down. And as this was happening, Matthew didn't show any remorse at all after being arrested. As a matter of fact, he saw that he was getting a lot of attention from the police officers, from anyone who was getting involved in that interview. And so because of this, he was feeling like he had some power. He was loving the attention that he was getting. But Nicolette was taken very far away from him, so she can be questioned separately from him, and Hardis was taken away into another room as well. And Hardis was not really talking. He didn't really say much about the whole thing the first time around. He was silent, but Nicolette just kept on saying that she wanted to talk to Matthew. And I'm guessing this is because that she wanted to know what she had to say next. I'm guessing she wanted to get more orders from Matthew because this control that he had her under hasn't worn off yet. So she just didn't want to say anything else if the police didn't let her see Matthew. But as the police were questioning Matthew and as they were talking to Matthew, they told him that they know that they had lied about everything. They know that even the phone records between them do not match up with everything that they said, because they found out that the calls between Matthew and Nicolette were happening during the time they said they were together at the movies. So their alibis were not making a lot of sense. Everything was just all over the place. Everything was just not adding up. And so they told Matthew that, listen, we know that you lied. We know that you are all involved in this. So you better confess now or you're going to get in big trouble. So when Matthew realized that he was busted, like there was no way out, he tried to play this off as if he was innocent. He ended up saying that he knew that Nicolette and Horace hated their parents because their parents were abusing them as kids, but he had no idea that they hated them to a point where they wanted to kill them. He was saying that, listen, I have no idea what happened. This has nothing to do with me. All I know is the siblings hated their parents because their parents were abusing them. And this was actually a lie. It was a lie, and Matthew was just trying to control and manipulate the situation all over again by making it seem like he was innocent and he wanted to throw Horace and Nicolette under the bus. But as they kept on questioning him even more, and as they kept on showing him that we have evidence that speaks against everything you're telling us, Matthew then decided to pull one card up from his sleeve. He then decided to say, okay, listen, I'm the one who did it. Okay, I killed Ricky. I killed Johnny. I'm the one who did the whole thing. And this seriously surprised the police because now they were wondering, like, okay, why is he suddenly confessing? Why is he suddenly turning around like this and taking the blame for everything? Why? But this was actually a plan that Matthew had, that he was going to try to confess. And even though the police found evidence that suggested that it wasn't him who directly murdered Ricky and Johnny, if they found out and he said that he's the one who did it, they were going to think that he was somehow trying to protect his fiancée. He was trying to say anything that he could so they can turn their attention away from her. And if this happened like that, then anything that he was going to say afterwards, they were not going to consider because they were just going to think, he's just saying it to protect her. So really, his confession cannot be relied upon. And so this was a plan that he had. He didn't do it because he cared about Nicolette. He didn't do it because he was trying to protect her. He did it so he can somehow get them to turn their attention to her and act as if like he was protecting her. Like I said, Matthew was enjoying this attention that he was getting from the police and everyone else who was involved in that interrogation. And when the police saw this, while they were interrogating Hardis as well, Hardis was still silent. He was crying. He was just broken over the fact that he had to kill his own father, over the fact that he lost his own mother, and he wasn't really talking much. And so, because of this, they thought that he was trying to protect Matthew and he was trying to protect his sister as well. So then they decided to take him to the room where Matthew was, and they decided to show him that Matthew was busy talking and just throwing them under the bus just so he can save his own skin. And when he saw that Matthew was trying to betray them, and Matthew was basically saying that his parents died for nothing, Hardis was getting angrier and angrier by the second. And so then he decided that he was finally going to tell the truth and he was finally going to confess to everything that happened that night because he saw that there was no point in trying to protect Matthew because Matthew kept on rambling on and on about what happened that night and about the fact that it wasn't his fault and he's innocent in the entire thing. So then Horace gave out a 10-page statement, a fully written statement about what really happened that night. And then he went on to add the fact that Matthew bragged to him about sneaking his diary out of the house while the police were investigating the house, trying to see what happened. And this was so dumb. Matthew was so stupid. Horace told the police that Matthew bragged to him that he hid the diary in the police station. He ripped out a few pages and decided to flush them, but the rest of the diary he hid in the police station. And of course, the police found it with ease. And when they did, they got to go through it and they even recovered some pages that were damaged and they got to see everything. So Matthew really dug his own grave in this one, but of course, it was fortunate because it meant that justice was going to be served. So now Matthew's jig was entirely up. It was game over for him. But of course, as the diary and everything in it was revealed, even to Horace, he got to realize that seriously, Matthew was never who he said he was. And this really meant that his parents died for nothing. And this broke Horace to pieces, learning that he was following someone who was just a liar, who was just a manipulator, who was a control freak, someone who just came to ruin their lives, all for lies and money. He got so mad about it. He got so pissed and he was just broken by the whole thing. But Nicolette provided a bit of a challenge because she still believed that Matthew was who he said he was. And she still didn't want to say anything to the police until they let her see him. And so finally, they decided that, okay, you know what? Since this is not going anywhere, and since Matthew had already, like, we know that he lied about everything, and even her brother knows, let's let her see Matthew. So they decided to let Nicolette see Matthew, and when she did, she wanted to confront him about everything because they kept on telling her that that man is not a son of God. He's not who you think he is. He lied to you, he manipulated you, he ruined your life, all for nothing. And since she wasn't willing to believe them, they decided that, okay, let's go so you can see for yourself. And so when Nicolette finally got to see Matthew, she confronted him and she was asking him if he's really the Son of God, if they seriously did what they did for a purpose that was actually real. And Matthew just looked at Nicolette and laughed at her, and he even called her crazy. She just could not believe what this guy was doing. She couldn't believe that this was actually Matthew who was doing this to her. And then she kept on trying to ask him even more if he is really the Son of God. And Matthew just looked back at her and he smiled and said, "There is no God." And just like that, her entire world crumbled all around her because now she was realizing that Matthew had gotten her to kill her mother and had gotten her brother to kill his own father, all for nothing. She just could not believe that this was Matthew saying this. But she was in denial so much about it that she decided to try to convince herself that something was wrong with Matthew, that he was possessed or something took hold of him. She just could not bring herself to believing that all they did was for nothing. But then two pastors ended up coming to the police station to talk to her, and they educated her on what manipulation is and how it works and what people like Matthew end up doing to people. And so she ended up getting to see that Matthew was never who he said he was. And unfortunately, this meant that she killed her own mother and her brother killed their own father for nothing. And so their trial began in 2012. And according to the research that I found, it turns out that they were in holding for a very long time. They were not given bail for a very long time. And when it comes to Nicolette and Hardis, it turns out that they didn't get bail because none of the family members wanted to help them out. Like no one wanted to give them a place to stay. And so because of this, they had to stay detained until it was time for their trial in 2012. But Matthew, on the other hand, his bail at some point ended up being granted for 20,000 Rand. And so his mother almost sold everything they had just so she can make the 20,000 Rand bail. And I don't know, man. I get that, Matthew was her son and everything, but was it really the right thing to do for her to bail him out, for her to almost sell everything they had just so she can take him out of jail? I don't know. Like, do you think that it was the right thing to do for her to like sell almost everything they had just so she can pay for his bail? But I have mixed emotions about it. I mean, I'm not a parent. I don't know how it feels, but I'm just saying though, he had to be taught a lesson. When the trial began, all three of them, Matthew, Nicolette, and Hardis, pleaded not guilty. And Nicolette and Hardis went in to say that they were under severe control by Matthew. Like they couldn't see or they couldn't think rationally for themselves because Matthew had manipulated them so much and he made them believe in his lies, in him being the third son of God. And because of this, they thought that they were doing the right thing when they decided to kill their parents. So they pleaded not guilty. And the court did end up believing that, you know what, they were under severe psychological control and manipulation, and they had no control over their actions. They couldn't see right from wrong because of what Matthew did to them. And because of this, they were given very light sentences. As a matter of fact, Nicolette only got 12 years in prison, and her brother only got 10 years in prison. In my opinion, even though they were under some manipulation or control because of Matthew, I still feel like those sentences were not really enough. I still feel like they still were not justice enough. Okay, if the judge didn't give them life sentences, I would have said, all right, cool. If the judge gave him a few decades, a couple of decades in jail for what they did, that would have been justice. But 10 and 12 years, they seem a little bit too little for what they did. But they were given 12 years and 10 years in prison. Nicolette served 12 years and Hardis served 10 years. But Hardis was released in 2018 and he had to serve the rest of his sentence under house arrest. Nicolette was released in 2012 and she ended up being married to someone else while she was in prison. And so when she got out, she got to live the rest of her life with her new husband. And I don't know, I don't have any update on what they're doing recently. Matthew, on the other hand, he was given life in prison. As a matter of fact, he was given 2 life sentences in prison. Now, that right there is what I call sweet justice finally served, because he was going to be in prison for the rest of his life all alone. And to this day, he's still in prison. So, yeah, Matthew got what he deserved, and justice was served for Ricky and Johnny Lauder, who was just murdered for nothing, for lies, for a fake prophecy, for a fake prophet, or whatever Matthew called himself. But finally, the people who are involved in this, they got to be arrested. They never got away with it, and justice was served at last. And that was the case of the Lauder family murders. It was such a draining case to cover, to know that something like this actually happened, that two loving parents had to be killed for someone's lies. And on top of that, an innocent grandmother had to die from a heart attack after hearing that her own son was killed. Like, Matthew was just the devil himself. He was seriously sent from hell to ruin this family, and he did exactly that. Yeah, that's what I had for you guys for this week. But tell me what you think about the case. Tell me if you enjoyed it, and if you did, please leave a big thumbs up for me by pressing that like button. It would really go a long way. I would appreciate your support. And if you are new here, please subscribe to the channel so you can catch on every week when I upload a new case of True Crime and Chill. And with that being said, my name is Prince Tlali, and I will see you guys next week. Take care of yourself, love yourself, and live your best life. Have a great one.